Hi, I'm back here in my little studio where I do these videos. It's actually the same place that I do my writing here on this desk. I've been working lately on a book that should come out this fall from Blank Slate Press. It's entitled To Live and Die in the Floating World. And it takes its inspiration from when I worked on a tourist barge in Burgundy back many, many years ago. I only worked for a month, but the richness of the experience makes you feel like I worked there for 6 or 7 months. And the crew had a lot of stories about things that had happened over the years, some of the guests they had had and some of the experiences. Some of them a little sinister. And it was from one of those stories, I won't relate now, that I took the inspiration for the book. And so I'm going to read to you a little bit from the first chapter of To Live and Die in the Floating World. Chapter 1. It was nearly midnight, and I was drunk and thinking of heading back to my dump when the Irishman Rory Gallagher came through the door of the smoky, fly-blown bar on the pimply backside of Montmartre. I thought later how different things might have been if he'd chosen another bar, or I'd been sober. I'd met Gallagher 3 months earlier in a little town on the Loire where we'd each stumbled into short-term jobs at a campground. We'd both passed the previous few months kicking around Europe, pretending to find ourselves, even while I worked hard at not being found by anyone else. In the way of such wanderers, we struck up a momentary friendship before parting bitterly over an Italian girl who decided to head to Paris with me instead of heading with Gallagher to the south of France. This checkered history flickered through my mind as I saw him walk in searching for an open table. My first impulse was to keep my head down and hope he didn't see me. I should have followed it. Instead, under the influence of alcohol-induced brotherhood, I raised my hand and gave him a welcoming nod, the nod making my head swim after several beers on an empty stomach because I couldn't afford both dinner and beer. He cocked his head to one side and squinted at me with one eye, trying to place me. When the other eye popped open, I knew he'd made the connection. To my muddled surprise, his frown morphed into a grin I should have recognized as the sort the big bad wolf would make running into one of the 3 little pigs in a back alley. "Well, Kip Weston, you old sod, what are you doing drinking alone?" I looked around for the 2 jolly Moroccans who'd been with me all evening, but found they'd drifted away at some point. "And where's the lovely Giulietta?" he asked, memory sharpening the edge of his voice. I gave him a who-knows gesture, heading to Brittany with some random Greek the last I saw her. My confession about losing her took some of the menace off his smile. "How was the south of France?" I asked him. "Dunno, never got there." He pulled out a chair and slumped into it with a theatric sigh of weariness. "Needed to replenish my empty purse. Got work in Burgundy for a couple of months and didn't get any further south than Dijon." "So where are you heading now?" "Back to Dublin. I was promised a job starting the end of September and I've got to get back or lose it. How about yourself?" I told him of my travels with Giulietta and without, and how I ended up in one of the smarmier quarters of Paris. "Where are you staying?" "I've been at the Écu d'Or, the gold coin, the last couple of weeks." "The Écu? My God, Weston, that's the sort of place where you wake up in the morning with stitches on your back and one of your kidneys missing." "I'm broke." "You were flush back in Burgundy. Made me wonder why you bothered with the job." It had sounded pretentious even at the time to say that I'd taken the job because I wanted to spit the silver spoon out of my mouth, show my solidarity with the sort of people my father dismissed as the great unwashed. For now, I only told him, "The money's gone. So go home." "Don't want to go home." The defiance I'd meant to project somehow came off as petulance. "Well, ask your old man for some guilt. You told me he's swimming in the stuff. How many houses? And a yacht, as I recall." At the mention of my father, I momentarily lost the power of speech. Gallagher couldn't have understood why, and I wasn't about to tell him. So I laid my head on the table and breathed into the pretzel crumbs. The sound of a crow cawing made me think I'd drunk way too much, but it was only Gallagher laughing. And you were getting ready to take over your father's business, yes? He snickered. Graduated from some toffee-nosed school in finance or management or something. No, I barked into the tabletop, the word ricocheting back at me hard enough to make my head bounce. I told you about that. Oh, that's right. Comparative literature. I'd forgotten the irritating warble of his voice when he was full of himself. Yeah, just to rub the old man's nose in it, right? You graduate magna cum laude or some such Greek last spring, and now in your 22nd year, 22nd year, you're going back to write the great American novel about him and his, kind, just to show you've got too much soul to take over the family business and make a real living. Rich kids. In his mockery, I recognized the words I'd often spoken after a couple of drinks, and before I recalled the sight of my father, lying on the floor of his study, his eyes wide, blood seeping onto the parquet behind his head. I blinked and shook my head to make the image go away, a skill I had nearly mastered over the last few months. Enough about that, I muttered. Oh, sure thing, Kipster. Meanwhile, why don't you just give the dad a phone call and get some money and take me out to dinner? Somebody stole my phone. Stole your... His strangled ha came out loud enough to make my brains wobble. Well, aren't you the pathetic case? Here, use mine. We'll call him right... I don't want to call my father. I yanked myself up straight too quickly, and the room oscillated alarmingly. Whatever my disorientation, I didn't want to tell him that in fact I'd thrown the phone away, fearing that someone could track me from it. Gallagher leaned back in his chair and eyed me for a moment. I almost admire you, but not quite. Not quite, because you're a stubborn bugger and you don't know how to do yourself a favor. While I contemplated this profundity, he ordered another beer for me and called up a whiskey for himself, as if being an Irishman he had to keep up a certain image. While I slurped the foam off the top of the bottle, Gallagher regarded me narrowly, like Ming the Merciless sizing up some poor sap for a bad end. I was about to tell him to knock it off when his expression bloomed into a smile. So, Weston, my old friend, maybe you could use a job. Gallagher had put on his accent thick as a brick, something he did when he wanted to be charming. I half expected him to break into when Irish eyes are smiling. But that wasn't where he went with it. You told me you're the nautical sort, done a lot of sailing. How about a job on a boat? Even while I wondered why he would be willing to help me after the girl and all, I said, a boat? I knew that would wake you up. With a half smile on his lips, Gallagher sipped at his whiskey and looked around the smoky room. When he didn't follow up on the boat thing, I decided he'd been kidding. We talked a little longer about where we'd been, what we'd done. Gallagher ordered another round. I'd almost forgotten about the boat when he asked again if I wanted to work. He said he'd been working on a small tourist barge down in Burgundy, a hotel barge, as he called it. The Celeste. Owner's a Frenchwoman named Diane. She takes on a group of guests, 6, that's all, and treats them like royalty for $25,000 per week. At the end of the week, she packs them off and takes on another crew. There's 3 in the crew plus Diane, easy work, decent pay. So why'd you leave? He gave me an if only you knew smirk. Like I say, I've got to get back to Dublin. He took a look into the depths of his drink. Anyway, my departure leaves her a crew member short. Most of the guests are American, so she wants people who speak English. If you've got a driver's license, the job's yours. If you have enough sense to get there first. He shrugged his indifference. It was up to me. His Errol Flynn smile should have made me think twice, but like I said, I'd had a few and was having a hard enough time thinking once. I needed the money, and was tired of this part of Paris, the only part I could afford. Summer, with its seemingly endless possibilities, was nearly over, and with fall on the horizon, I felt like a grasshopper who should be thinking about turning into an ant. So I said, sure, why not? He brought me one more beer to seal the deal and knocked back another whiskey. After a bit, he mentioned that he'd just come in from Dijon on the late train, and the guys he hoped to stay with in Montmartre seemed to have moved on, and could he maybe flop at my place? You willing to risk a kidney? I said. Sure thing, he said, and we both laughed, though I didn't like the sound of his. Anyway, that's the first few pages of To Live and Die in the Floating World. It'll be coming out in the fall. I'm sure I'll be talking about it again to you. And I appreciate all the kind notes people have been sending me. You can let me know what sort of thing you'd like me to do. I've been writing about writing. Some of my favorite books. I've been reading a few things to you. So if you have some ideas of what you'd like me to do for you next, let me know. Until then, so long.